Flying can rattle even the most seasoned travelers, but what if we told you there's way more happening behind the scenes than you ever imagined? We're revealing the craziest secrets of the air you never knew on this episode of the Infographics Show. Flight secrets exposed that are never told to passengers. Number 25. The pilot, the mature, comforting figure that's tasked with keeping the plane afloat. We all have an image of the classic pilot in our heads, and odds are it always looks a little like Tom Hanks as Sully. But pilots do often look a little alike. They're usually older, put together, and clean-shaven. And if you think about it, you've probably never seen a pilot with a beard, and there's actually a very good reason for that. It has nothing to do with looking good for the job. Above all else, a pilot needs to be able to carry out their duties no matter what's going on around them. That's why everything, down to the tiniest detail, has to be just right. A 1987 FAA study revealed that oxygen masks don't seal properly over beards. Depending on the beard size, oxygen levels ranged from 16% all the way up to 67%. Not ideal in an emergency. Since then, most airlines require pilots to be clean-shaven, although a few like Air Canada now allow strictly trimmed beards. And it doesn't just regulate what they look like, it regulates what they eat. Number 24. The pilot and the co-pilot need to be in sync, with one leading the show and the other being ready to carefully follow their orders and take over at a moment's notice. They train together, go over the rules together, and keep in close contact during the flight. But there is one thing they don't share: a taste in food. Whether it's airport meals or an in-flight meal, if one pilot is ordering the salmon, the other can pretty much be guaranteed to order the beef. Do opposites attract when assigning pilots? No, it turns out the real answer is a lot more messy. Above all else, it's critical that planes have one effective pilot at any time, and if both pilots are sprinting to the bathroom to evacuate the content of their lunch, the flight's in big trouble. There were a few major cases of food poisoning on flights, including a 1982 flight from Lisbon to Boston, where 8 out of 10 crew members, including the pilot, became sick from tainted pudding. Thankfully, the co-pilot didn't have a sweet tooth. As such, while the FAA doesn't regulate pilots' food choices, several airlines do tell pilots to vary their diets from each other just in case. But maybe the biggest secret pilots don't want you to know is they're not working all the time. Number 23. Pilots aren't slacking off when they're in the cockpit, but most of the time, they're not even the one flying the plane. And maybe that's for the best. What's more reliable than a human most of the time? Autopilot. While most people think Autopilot is reserved for emergencies, today it's on around 90% of the time, turning the pilots into co-pilots. These days, the human touch is mostly reserved for takeoff, landing, and when something goes wrong. Their primary job is to observe, make sure everything is on target, and be ready to take over in case there's even the slightest hint of error. But airplane manufacturers are currently working on ways to advance it even more, possibly automating takeoff and landing. And when the pilots need a break, they have their own little enclave. Number 22. Once those seatbelt lights go off, the passengers generally have the run of the plane. They can stretch their legs, use the bathroom, or check in with their friends a few seats away. But there are some areas of the plane that remain off limits. There's the cockpit, of course. The days of tours are long over by about 20 years, and it's best not to head to the first class section unless you have a ticket. But you might also encounter a closed-off door that doesn't seem to fit. And if you enter accidentally, you might just disturb the most important person on the plane. Pilots are humans too, and on long flights, sometimes one needs a break and hands it over to the co-pilot. To do that, they head to the hidden bunks that are often located above the main cabin. These are sort of like Japanese capsule hotels in size, allowing pilots just enough space to lie down and catch some very quick Z's. Not only are these hidden bunks useful if a pilot needs to recharge, but they're actually mandated by law. Crew members need to be given rest breaks on long-haul flights to keep everything running smoothly. And you might be distressed to find out that every flight is a closer call than you think. Number 21. The days of common plane crashes are thankfully over. The US didn't have any major commercial plane crash in over 2 decades until 2025, and that one was caused by an outside impact. Most airplanes have countless fail-safes to keep them in the air. And there is one thing that is more important than any other: the fuel tanks. Flights are fueled up before they take to the air, and the fuel level is carefully monitored to ensure there's enough gas in the tank to get the plane to the destination. But that is the secret: just enough. Planes don't often fly with a full tank of gas, and that means they're often on a bit of a shoestring to get to home base if there's a delay. High winds or other interference could cause a plane to fall behind schedule. While there's no way a plane's just gonna run out and fall out of the sky, planes have sometimes been forced to land at closer airports to refuel. There are a few reasons for this, but the main one comes down to money. Full tanks are heavier, slower to fly, and costlier to operate, so the airlines would prefer efficiency over a safety cushion. And pilots are often keeping some shocking secrets about close calls. Number 20. We've all encountered some turbulence in the air, and it usually is just a few minutes of intense shaking and then things settle down. But once in a while, there's a shock that makes you feel like the flight is going to drop right out of the sky. The pilots will usually communicate with the flight that everything's okay. We just hit a rough patch. And pilots can always be trusted to tell the truth, right? Not exactly, because Mother Nature often has a rough hand. The pilot's first job is to fly the plane, but their second is to keep everyone on board calm. And nothing ruins the calm like when everyone knows the plane just got hit by lightning. Every pilot's likely to encounter this at some point in their career, and the planes are built for it. There will be a loud noise and a flash of light, but the planes are insulated and they won't lose power or plummet to the ground. Most people on the plane might not even know what happened, so the pilot isn't going to throw everyone into a panic. But there is one environmental factor that scares pilots more than any other. Number 19. Turbulence and lightning strikes are just part of the job for pilots. They're trained to deal with them. What does scare them, though, are updrafts. These massive wind gusts come out of nowhere. They don't show up on radar at night, so the pilot can be cruising along business as usual, and then the plane is violently thrown into the air. Retired pilot John Nance said that updrafts are like hitting a giant speed bump while traveling 500 miles per hour, and actually provide a far bigger threat to the plane than turbulence does. This is one of the conditions that requires a pilot to be on his or her game and ready to adjust the plane as quickly as possible to keep it flying straight, reorient it, and get it back to cruising altitude before the alarms go off. And the fact that most unexpected updraft events will happen at night only adds to the chaos. Wake up, everyone! And pilots are very careful with what they say. Number 18. The only thing scarier than air conditions is a plane out of control. If the worst happens and a plane needs to make an emergency landing, it's important that everyone stay calm. And that's why, if one of the engines blows, the pilot won't say, "We just lost an engine." They'll either say something like, "One of our engines is indicating improperly," or just stay mum, because the planes are still able to fly with one functioning engine. And just in case, they have a few safety tips. Most pilots never actually have an emergency landing, but those who have say that passengers can make things easier on themselves in a few simple ways. First up, stay buckled in when you're in your seat, even if the seatbelt light is off. That's because the initial shock might injure people who aren't safely belted in if the plane drops quickly. And second, wear good shoes in case you need to do an emergency evacuation, so leave the flip-flops and the Crocs in your checked baggage and put on the sneakers. And they're hoping that you'll make it easier on them in some other ways. Number 17. It's one of the most annoying parts of being on an airplane. You can't use your cell phone. Sure, you could use the Wi-Fi or watch movies, but your phone has to be on airplane mode, and you can't use your data to check your emails or texts, although everyone is glad the lady in 22C can't talk to her daughter about her gout loud enough for the whole plane to hear. Flight attendants don't mess around when it comes to your phone. The way they talk about it, you would think sending a casual LOL text mid-flight could bring the whole plane down. It might not be that dangerous, but yeah, best keep the cell phone off. Cell phone signals used to pose a much bigger danger to aircrafts, but now it's largely a case of signal interference being the biggest issue. Airplanes rely heavily on radio signals to stay in communication with the ground. While interference from one cell phone isn't likely to endanger that, interference from 30 at the same time might just cause a little too much static. So it's better safe than sorry, and the cell phones stay off. And if you're watching the schedule, you might be surprised by the fact that the airlines aren't always telling the truth. Number 16. There's nothing more annoying than a delayed flight, especially if you're trying to make a connection. Every long-time traveler has had that nightmare story of missing the connection that you thought was safe by minutes, and it can ruin a whole vacation. But the airlines don't want to have that happen either, and there are many customer satisfaction bureaus that rate airlines and routes, and one of the biggest factors is online performance. If a flight keeps missing its arrival time, customers will be warned not to take it, and the airlines have a solution, but it might not save you time. Many airlines have started adding 15 minutes to half an hour to the flight time when you book it, ensuring that if the plane is a little late, it'll still be classified as on time. And if it's a little early, well, that's just a bonus. You can take some extra time at the airport to get yourself a bagel, and then you might just see the pilot behind you in line. And if the plane is running late, they might contact air traffic control to see if there are any ways to shave a few minutes off the travel route. And in the worst-case scenarios, the pilot can make a difference. Number 15. Unfortunately, delays do still happen. If a plane isn't going to get there on time, the connecting flight will leave without some of its passengers. Usually all the airline can do is try to book the passenger on the next available flight, but that might be a day or more later depending on the circumstances. However, in rare circumstances, pilots will go to extreme measures, contacting the ground and seeing if a passenger who is in dire straits can be accommodated. But the circumstances matter a lot, and so does the passenger. Pilots say that if you start yelling at your flight attendant that you are the most important person on the plane and they had better get you what you want, you're likely to be ignored and mocked behind your back. But if you have a legitimate emergency and you're calm and polite about it, they might pass it on to the pilot. A recent case involving a woman who was going to miss a connection that would allow her to say goodbye to her dying mother made national headlines. That was a rare case where a flight was actually delayed to allow a single passenger to make a connection. But rude passengers might not just miss a flight, they might not get off the ground in the first place. Number 14. It might seem like it's pretty easy to get kicked off a plane, given how often people seem to go viral on TikTok for making scenes on a flight. But the reality is the airlines don't actually want to lose any fares. They take deplaning someone pretty seriously, as it'll cause a lot of red tape and might delay the plane for a while. And that's why, more often than not, they'll try to de-escalate the situation. If a passenger is in the wrong seat, they'll try to get them to move rather than immediately kicking them off the flight for causing trouble. But there are a few events that'll cause an immediate removal. One of the things that flight attendants are trained to keep an eye on is drunk passengers. Yes, we all know it's annoying to wait for a plane, and that airport bar is very inviting. You're not going to be deplaned for hiccuping a few times and smelling of champagne. But if you're slurring your words, stumbling down the aisle, or starting a beef with the crew or other passengers, that's a different story. The flight crew's likely to think better safe than sorry and send them to sober up in the airport lounge. And there are some things that won't just get you kicked off a flight, they'll keep you from booking another one. Number 13. Despite what Hollywood might have you believe, the no-fly list isn't something easy to get on. You're not going to be banned from flying for life because your seatmate was annoying and the flight attendant got frustrated with both of you. But airplanes do have strict rules to keep everyone safe, and they are a private business, which means they have the right to refuse service. Passengers who cause a disruption, get drunk and disorderly, or damage equipment might find themselves having to look elsewhere for their next flight. But to get banned from flying altogether, it takes some seriously dumb behavior. Some of the cases that have gotten people placed on the no-fly list are pretty obvious. Anyone who gets violent with a crew member is likely to be taken out in cuffs. Those who try to sneak dangerous items onto a plane or make jokes about bombs or taking down the plane aren't likely to be getting on a plane again anytime soon. But one of the most common causes for getting arrested and banned is people who just can't hold off their addiction. Smoking or vaping on a plane is a massive risk for a fire, and those who do it mid-flight are likely to be taken off the flight by a marshal. And sometimes even the policies that don't make sense have a serious reason behind them. Number 12. Once the plane is at cruising altitude, it's usually smooth sailing from there. Passengers are free to relax, get out their laptop, and try to get some work done. But when landing approaches, it's usually all hands on deck. One of the first things you're told to do is put your laptop away and put up the tray table. Of course, it's tempting to see if you could squeeze a few more minutes of work, but that's not a good idea. In fact, it could seriously injure someone. Landing is the most dangerous time of the flight, as it requires a very sudden drop in altitude and then potentially a hard landing. And that can shake things loose. Pilots and flight crew report seeing some surprising injuries during this period, such as a laptop going flying and hitting someone in the head, or oversized wheeled baggage falling out of the overhead compartment. And not only could it send people to the hospital, it could delay deplaning and result in a plane full of angry guests who knew exactly who to blame. And that means there is one thing you definitely shouldn't have in your lap. Number 11. It used to be a much more common thing for parents to try to save money while flying by keeping infants or toddlers on their lap. Lap babies, as they were called, were usually free, and you had to keep control of the wriggling baby during the flight, which wasn't always easy. But as times have changed, more parents have wondered, is this safe or is it better to just take the financial hit and buy a plane seat for Junior? Pilots have weighed in and they are very clear. According to the experts, flying with a baby in the lap is one of the most dangerous things you can do. If there is a sudden, unexpected deceleration, the kid becomes a projectile. In the best-case scenario, a parent could get a split lip or a black eye from being head-butted by their pride and joy. In the worst-case scenario, the kid can be launched across the plane. Most pilots wish lap babies were prohibited altogether, but at least some airlines are offering reduced flight rates to get an infant their own seat. Also, due to the limited amount of oxygen masks, most planes only allow one lap baby per row. They're also not allowed in emergency exit rows, so Junior isn't the person to rely on during an in-flight emergency. But before you get on the plane, there are some dirty little secrets. Number 10. Have you ever booked your flight, gotten to the gate, and then been told, "Sorry, no room for you"? How is that possible? You have a ticket. Well, it seems to happen more and more often. United Airlines got into very hot water when a bloodied doctor was dragged off of his flight by refusing to leave the seat he was already in, and it ultimately cost the company millions. It's all a part of a hated process called overbooking, where the company sells more seats than they actually have. And shockingly, it is not a mistake, it's common practice. It's all about maximizing profits, and companies assume that a small percentage of people scheduled to fly won't show up. Maybe they'll have emergencies, or maybe they just oversleep, but they want those seats filled, so they estimate the number of passengers who won't show up and then oversell the flight by that percentage. When too many people show up for a flight, airlines typically bump the passengers without a seat assignment first, so the chance of someone getting kicked out of a seat they're already in is pretty unlikely these days, and if you do get bumped, they're now required to offer compensation. And that also is why your seat isn't guaranteed. Number 9. It's especially frustrating because you often pay more to select your seat now. But more and more it feels like you booked a window in 7A and you end up crammed into a middle seat in 23E. So what are you actually paying for? The airlines put in the fine print that no seat selections are 100% guaranteed, and passengers generally aren't even due any compensation unless they're moved to a different class. It's one of the biggest annoyances of flying, but there is often a good reason. Airplanes are juggling seats up until takeoff, and the reason is often out of their hands. Sometimes a flight gets shifted to a plane with a very different seating arrangement, so they have to do their best to juggle everyone in a satisfactory way. Other times, there's a case where people need to sit next to each other, such as a disabled person and their companion, or a mother and their 2-year-old who had to fly at the last minute when only separate seats were available. So this is one annoyance that likely isn't going away anytime soon. And if you think you're getting sick every time you're on a plane, you might be blaming the wrong source. Number 8. Everyone's been there. You get on the plane, you settle into your seat as it fills up, and as soon as the plane is full, the old guy behind you starts hacking up a lung and continues all the way to Orlando. Of course, you're gonna get sick now. After all, the planes are closed metal tubes, and the air just recirculates everywhere with nowhere to dissipate. In fact, you're probably not just gonna get sick, the entire plane is. Well, you might, but it's probably not the air circulation. Most long-haul planes actually have state-of-the-art filtration systems, which came into play a lot during COVID-19. While planes asked people to mask up, they emphasized that the filtration made them a safer place to be than most restaurants. What isn't safe, however, is the germs on every hard surface. There are hundreds of people making their way through the plane every day, each carrying germs. Your seat was probably sat in by other people just hours before, and their hands are all over everything. If you're getting plane crud, that's probably the real culprit. And hey, what's the deal with airline food? Number 7. Of course, these days it's lucky if you get any food on a plane. If you're on a flight under 3 hours, odds are you're getting just a bag of mini pretzels and half a cup of soda. But if you're on a longer flight, you might still be getting a full meal. Some flights, particularly international ones, offer a packaged meal for your flight. Anything from a breakfast sandwich to a boxed meal with meat, potatoes, and vegetables heated up in the galley. But as the joke often goes, no matter the food you're eating, it might just not taste very good. And that might not be the airline's fault. Airplane food is heavily processed to ensure it doesn't spoil, so it's not going to be gourmet, it's going to be closer to a TV dinner. But you might notice that nothing tastes particularly good on the plane. That's because high-altitude conditions, including the very dry air, have the bizarre ability to dull our taste buds and sense of smell. Given that this will happen on every flight, it's not a surprise that the airplane wants the food to just be okay. But if there is something on the plane that you're surprisingly a fan of, there's good news. Number 6. Airplane food is parceled out carefully, with just enough being prepared for the number of passengers. But if someone doesn't show up for the flight, there is going to be some leftover, and in most cases, it just has to be thrown out at the end of the flight. The pre-made food is going to spoil soon, so there's no way to keep it for the next flight once it's been heated. That means if you're on a long-haul flight and the airplane food really agreed with you, it doesn't hurt to ask your flight attendant for a little more. Hey, you're helping them save money. But if you're just ready to settle in for a drink, be warned. Number 5. If you're lucky enough to be on a plane where alcohol is served, it can feel like a free-for-all. Sure, they're charging your card for it, but that's a problem for tomorrow. But while it might be tempting to indulge and drink the flight away, you'll find that it's not a surprise. You'll be cut off before you know it. The cabin crew is trained to keep a very strict tab on how much each passenger drinks. The effects of drinking can be heightened at high altitude, and they want to avoid any sticky situations. You best stick to coffee then. While it might seem like the safest option on board, most people report that the coffee and the tea are far from the best choice. For one thing, it'll rarely be served too hot, with turbulence always a possibility. No one wants a repeat of the McDonald's hot coffee incident. But the bigger problem might be in how it's made. The coffee and tea are typically brewed with tap water, which isn't the best quality. Best ask for that half cup of Coke. And if you think you'll just try to sleep the trip away, it might be more difficult than you think. Number 4. For long-haul flights, most of the cabin is sleeping for a good part of the trip. That is, except the cabin crew. If you're a light sleeper, you'll likely be woken up by them rushing up and down the aisle periodically. They might even disrupt you once in a while, checking to make sure that everything's okay. Well, it was until someone woke me up. But it turns out that this isn't just the flight attendants being bored and looking for something to do. They're actually performing an important function, and they'll keep on doing it. It's actually policy for most airlines that the cabin crew must check the cabin every 30 minutes. They're trained to observe for any signs of trouble, be it people with equipment or substances that they shouldn't be using, someone in medical distress, or couples that have gotten a little too handsy with each other. And they finish every sweep by checking in on the flight crew to make sure both pilots are still in working order. And that's not the only way flight attendants can surprise. Number 3. These multi-talented agents of the airline bring you your food, check on the crew, and they're also security. Flight attendants are trained to be the first line of defense in case of an emergency. There have been many times when a drunk, angry, or sick passenger suddenly got out of control, and the flight attendants pulled out their secret accessory, handcuffs. Each flight attendant has access to a pair of plastic restraints, and they're all trained on how to peacefully restrain a troublemaker. And if need be, they can assist in much trickier affairs. All flight attendants have some sort of medical training. This is mostly limited to first aid, but they're prepared for any sort of emergency. In the past, they've been tasked with stopping bleeding, handling broken bones, and yes, even the occasional case of a woman going into labor on the plane. They're armed with a first aid kit and plenty of training in just how crazy things can go on a plane. But sometimes more professional support is needed. Number 2. Is there a doctor on board? It's almost a stock line at this point, more likely to create a wave of laughter than an initial response. But every flight attendant has a story where they actually had to yell that. And yes, there usually was a doctor on board. Doctors are always ready to spring into action when needed, diagnosing medical conditions and even performing medical procedures on the fly. And they've had to do some crazy things on the floor of a plane. Of course, baby delivery is the most Hollywood-friendly, but it's actually one of the easiest procedures for a doctor to assist in. If everything goes smoothly, the mom will do most of the work. But doctors have had to do some messy and dangerous procedures, such as inserting a catheter to keep a bladder from bursting mid-flight, or even performing a dangerous decompression procedure on a woman who had boarded a flight with an untreated broken arm. And more often than not, the passengers get a view of the whole thing. It'll put you off that airline food. But maybe the top thing the airlines don't want you to know is they're probably lying to you a lot. Number 1. If you're a frequent traveler, you probably experienced quite a few technical delays. Maybe the airplane is being checked, or maybe there's some equipment missing. One way or another, that's another hour delayed, and another few rounds at the airport bar. You just hope that whatever they're doing, they get it all sorted out. Except that often, that's not the case at all. Airplanes can't fly without their crew, and they definitely can't fly without the pilot. So it's just as likely that someone overslept, got stuck in traffic, or tried to sneak in a last meal at their favorite hot dog place before leaving town for the day. Technical issues is a handy way of covering up any kind of delay, because the odds are most passengers won't know the technical details, and everyone feels better thinking it's all about checking the details than your pilot might have just been taking his time. Want to know more about how things could go very wrong? Check out most insane air disasters in the history of mankind, or watch this video instead.